Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of Tales of the 2S LGBTQ. My name is Douglas Parsons. This episode kickstarts year 3 of this little podcast that could. And I'm thrilled and honored that you've taken the time to listen, perhaps to a few minutes of previous episodes, or you are one of the diehards who have listened to the over 60 episodes produced so far. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Like almost everyone, the pandemic was rough, and I decided I needed an outlet to talk to people again, or at the very least, to listen. I miss being an active participant in engaging in the stories of our community. So this podcast began. The content of this show is what we call evergreen. That means you can go back and listen to any previous episode, and it's not tied to a specific day or the story of the day. These are stories that you can pick up and go listen to at any time, and it will be just as good as the day it was released. There's been incredible people on this podcast. I've had my personal favorites. Those tend to be the ones that surprise me. For example, there was a podcast episode with Quinn Wade released in April of 2021, and that stood out to me. There was so much I knew about Quinn's story on the outside looking in that was magical and fantastic to know more about. But I did not anticipate Quinn's openness about themselves being intersex. I had not gone into the conversation with the intent to ask questions about this, but Quinn took the time to share themselves, and I learned, and we learned so much from them. Or there's an episode like the ones that were done with Vince Spinato. We discussed his background, his memoir, his documentary, as well as the fragrance that he created for Judy Garland's 100th birthday. The second episode stands out to me because it was Vince's agent who reached out to me and said that Vince wanted to talk to me again. It's pretty damn cool. This episode starts another year of podcast interviews that you can watch on the Tales of the 2S LGBTQ YouTube site, or you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all of them. Although I do suggest to not listen to them while you're driving your car when you're sleepy. I really try to talk in my everyday voice, which is fast-ish. But as soon as I hit record, I revert back to my teaching voice, my working voice. I've worked in the career of English as an additional language for over 25 years, and it's hard to change what's been done before when you slow down your voice to make sure that you pronunciate your words clearly. Perhaps my future career is in reading bedtime stories. Maybe. I kid. It's great to be back and to be able to talk to my guest today, Christopher Rice. Before I bring Christopher to your screen and/or your listening ears, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about someone who has filled space in my heart for many years, and is someone that you may have known in real life or you had gotten to know through this podcast. Pam Hofmann was a huge supporter of the Tales of the 2S LGBTQ podcast, a huge supporter of me, and she was a large part of my chosen family. All of you may have gotten to know her through 3 episodes that we recorded together back in June of 2021. These episodes were also done with her wife, Karen. The two of them are part of the greatest love story that I have ever known, and they shared stories with all of us. Almost 60 years of being together, 55 years of marriage. It's truly a love story. Pam and Karen, truly two of the best people I have ever known. On November 11th, 2022, Pam left this earthly realm after battling cancer to a draw. While we knew that this day was coming, it was still with shock, and the chosen family are still navigating the new reality of having one of our fiercest supporters no longer with us. I was born with a box of puzzle pieces and told to put things together. And truth be told, I used to really suck at putting puzzle pieces together. I would do it in fits and starts, and someone make that box of puzzle pieces work. Then one day, two fully formed puzzle pieces came interlocked together. And lo and behold, those puzzle pieces that were Pam and Karen Hofmann fit into the center of the picture, my heart. From then, endless conversations would be had with Pam, and she had a way about her that would be intimidating. Not in a bad way, but in that when you were having a conversation with her, she was locked into you, and everything around her became non existent. It was you and her only. Her head was tilted downwards always. She would look over her glasses at you. Once a teacher and always a teacher. In a world where we multitask all the time by watching TV or cooking food, playing with our phones, it's intimidating to have someone throw all that away and to be with you in that moment. Pam was a true master storyteller. She would talk about a Pulitzer Prize winning niece and the stories written by her. She talked about her childhood growing up in Los Angeles and the amazing family that she had there and continues to have today. She would talk about her children in Ottawa and in Alaska. And these stories that she told always would weave a tale, talking about her family, but she did this by including you in her stories. Her life became yours as well. As it turns out, the Pulitzer Prize winning niece of hers came to my house for food. Her beloved cousin in Los Angeles, and especially his home, became a frequent travel destination for myself and my husband. At least before COVID put a pause to the world. And while I've never been to Alaska, I know that if I were to go, all I need to do is look for a traveling Renaissance fair, find some rogue pirates, and I would be accepted. Just remember not to bring the fish soup with me. While her stories are no longer being told by her here on Earth, her stories continue on in every one of us who is blessed to know her, to be loved by her, to be chosen by her. To me now, Pam Hofmann is the North Star. And I know that if I'm ever to be lost, I'll look for her as the North Star in the sky. And inevitably, I will find myself with the directions to get home or where I need to be. Pam, I promise you that the stories will continue to be told. And from one teacher to another, thank you for everything. Whether you are the teacher or the student in life, one thing we can all agree upon is that in this course that we call Life 101, you were its valedictorian. Straight A's across the board, Pam. Good night, and until we meet again. Let's shift gears and get into the interview I know you came here to listen to. Christopher Rice is the recipient of the Lambda Literary Award and is the Amazon charts and New York Times bestselling author of a number of books, including A Density of Souls, Bone Music, Blood Echo, and Blood Victory, which is part of the Burning Girls series. Heck, he published 4 best-selling New York Times thrillers by the age of 30. And he was declared one year one of People's Sexiest Men Alive. His work spans multiple genres, including suspense, crime, supernatural thriller, and erotic romance. He has been a Bram Stoker Award finalist 2 times for his novels The Heavens Rise and The Vines. I should also say he collaborated with his mother, the late great Anne Rice, on the novels Ramses the Dead, The Passion of Cleopatra, and Ramses the Damned, The Reign of Osiris. With all of that, Christopher and his best friend and producing partner, Eric Shaw Quinn, runs the production company Dinner Partners. Among other projects, they produce the podcast and video network TDPS, which can be found at www.thedinnerpartyshow.com. As mentioned, he writes novels under his name, but he also writes tales of romance between men under the pseudonym C. Travis Rice. In fact, Christopher and I are coming together in this episode to talk about his brand new book titled Sapphire Storm, which was released in March 2023, written under the name of C. Travis Rice. Sapphire Storm is part of the group of books that make up the Sapphire Cove series, 3 books that have come out in the last year focused on the shenanigans at a beautiful luxury resort on the Southern California coast. Let's welcome today my guest, best-selling author Christopher Rice.
Hey, there I am.
Welcome, Christopher. How's it going today?
It's going great. It's raining cats and dogs here in Los Angeles, but that's been the story now for, I think, about 3 months. So, and we need the rain. So I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. I promise.
I'm coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, and it's been bright sky, blue sky for the past few weeks. And we're happy because winter has been long and we're done with it.
Yes.
We're recording this on the first day of spring. It's raining in LA. It's blue sky here in Edmonton. And in New York, they say it could be stormy weather.
Yeah. Well, what is it? April. I always forget that. Right? April showers bring May flowers. Like April, it's supposed to rain in spring. I mean, I think we have we're so reactive to the weather right now because allegedly the planet is ending. So I think we're understandably attuned to it. But hopefully this is normal. I'm just so happy the drought is over. We've lived with the drought here in California for 3 years now. And it's frustrating to see the headlines immediately go into apocalypse about the rain without allowing us to have a moment of being relieved that the drought is coming to an end. Now, of course, the flooding is terrible, and I don't think anybody expected that. So obviously there's been good reporting on all of that. But I'm just, it's a strange world that we live in.
That it is, especially with the last 3 years added to it, when the world has changed and what was up is now down and what was down is now up. We're coming together here to talk about your brand new release of a novel that's part of the romance genre, erotic romance, perhaps in some areas. When I think of the books that you've written, I've always been drawn towards your novels that touch on suspense and crime and the supernatural thriller. I've had to change my lens when it comes to you to add in this romantic genre. But having said that, you write this genre quite well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
How did you come about to write the Sapphire Cove series?
I became a romance reader is what happens. I mean, here you have this genre that is so commercially successful. It's so popular. And what started to happen, and I don't remember however many years ago it was now, forever I had heard about slash fiction. And it had kind of a bad rap. It had a stigma around it. The stigma was that cisgendered women were writing sexy stories about men getting it on. And it was usually fanfic. And it was usually using characters like Kirk and Spock and all that sort of stuff. That was a very reductive version of a more complicated and diverse thing that was happening largely on the internet. And I had a very dismissive attitude towards it at first, which may seem strange given who my mother was. But my attitude was, what do these women know about male bodies and all that sort of stuff? And it gradually became I don't want to say more and more mainstream, but it started to come off of the message boards and into the world of book selling. And it was mostly on the wings of small presses that were capitalizing on indie publishing and what digital retailers like Amazon were doing for indie publishers and making possible. You were able to take risks on edgier titles without having to invest in a large print run, which used to be the type of thing that would determine whether a book was published or not. Can we afford to ship copies of it? And so people were taking risks and experimenting, and I started reading what was called at the time, and is still largely called, male romance. And I think part of that title was about acknowledging that the author was probably not male, and 9 times out of 10. And I really went in expecting to hate it and to just walk away with a belly full of fire about it. And instead, I became a convert, because what I realized halfway through reading one of the first books I read, which was by a queer woman, as I later learned, these characters weren't going to die. One of them was not going to kill the other. One of them was not going to end their life. One of them was not going to, like, I had been so conditioned to accept loss and trauma as the only valid form of storytelling about our lives, that I was set back on my heels when I found myself in a story which I knew was not going to end that way, because that's the promise of the genre, happily ever after. And so I became a pretty devoted reader of it. And as a result of that, I began to read more widely in romance in general. I became curious about the genre. I wrote some novellas that were kind of across the rainbow spectrum. They weren't the full-on gay male romance that I was starting to dream about writing. And, it took me a long time to get to that place, but it was really the strangeness of the pandemic and the being locked down at home here in California with nothing to do for most of the day. I was under contract for a book I was writing with my mother, and that I would work on in the morning. And then in the afternoon, when I would typically be going out to run errands or go to the gym or do all these sorts of out in the world things, I couldn't do those. So I was like, I'm going to brush off this idea I've had for this beachy, sunny, just completely far afield, as you were saying, of anything I had ever done. And I just started plugging away at it. And as with some of the projects that have been the most exciting and rewarding, by taking all of the expectations out of it, by not having a publishing plan for it, I was able to really enjoy it. And here we are 3 books later in that series.
I've had a pet peeve with romance, especially man to man romance novels, because the inevitable sex scenes are written either in a very cheesy way or it's very robotic in its written structure. But your writing in this new book, Sapphire Storm, well, damn, it was good.
Thank you.
So can you talk about what the writing mentality is when it comes to writing such a scene? Because surely it can't be more than just knowing innovative ways of using an ice cube.
Which are on display in this one. Listen, a good sex scene is about the characters. A good sex scene is an express, and it doesn't mean they're chit-chatting the whole time about their childhoods, because that would be weird during sex. And but a really good sex scene is about, who are these people together, naked in bed. And I think that really good romance novels are about someone who felt invisible finally being seen. That's the ultimate fantasy. And that's a fantasy that queer people are ripe for. I think that's why there are more and more of these novels featuring us, even by writers who aren't necessarily queer, because the idea of the marginalized queer person finally being told their whole life they're not worthy of love, their relationships are second class and shouldn't have legal recognition. The idea of that person getting a happily ever after has become really potent to a lot of people. And so that plays into the sex as well, because I think, look, there is a boilerplate out there for a lot of these male romance novels where 2 perfectly looking, gorgeous men get together and have porn sex and maybe turn into werewolves. I don't know. It's fine. Nothing against werewolf fiction. That, for a lot of queer men, does not make for a deep and compelling read. For a lot of us, that is as anxiety producing as walking through a gym in Manhattan or West Hollywood. And we go to this place of, well, why should these perfectly looking privileged people be getting exactly what they want in the area of relationships? Well, how are they hurting? It would be as if I try to explain it to straight romance novelists as if every heroine in every romance novel was a Victoria's Secret model with a trust fund. So more and more writers are playing with that construct, and they're writing things that are really resonating, because if you're going to write a story about romance, you're going to have to deal with the characters' insecurities. And a lot of those insecurities come up around sex, and having a sexual experience where your body is valued, where it's celebrated by somebody else. That's all stuff that can be really hot. There is a certain amount of showing versus telling in any good writing. If it's too much telling, it feels spoon-fed, it doesn't feel good. And I think in sex scenes, you can trick yourself into believing you're just writing the same old things over and over again. So let's go off the checklist, touch here. Like as you see with adult films, they film this angle, they film this angle, they film this angle, then they're done. You've got to still be inside the heads of those characters.
Today, we're talking to you about your new book, Sapphire Storm, written underneath the pen name C. Travis Rice. One thing that you touched upon with the chiseled male and the looks, I really appreciate the cover of this book, as well as the other books that are part of the Sapphire Cove series, in that it's not of the face or the body of the person. It's the two people holding hands. Was that something that you went into saying, this is what we need, rather than throwing up the blonde, chiseled, white cis male on the cover? Or is that something that just happened because of a great cover artist?
It was all of the above, really. It was a really interesting, complex conversation that we had about the cover, because cover conversations always happen. There's the intention of the author, there's the climate of publishing at the time. And then with a book like this, there is the rightful agenda of the book, which is to celebrate two men getting together, two cis men getting together in a queer romance. So all of those factors had to be considered in tandem. And I was really firm from the outset that I was against the current trend in covers overall, particularly around romance and rom-coms, which was a cutesy, cartoony illustration, which I said, please, for the love of God, I cannot publish a book with that crap on the cover. I just hate it. I personally don't like it. It felt strangely infantilizing of something that I wanted to be about, celebrating these two men. I didn't want them to look like cartoon characters. So I had my own difficulties around that. That's kind of where we started. And the book talk craze at the time, which is now somewhat in recession, I think, was nobody wanted faces on covers at all. Nobody wanted human figures on covers. Everybody wanted symbols. Now, I felt that was really YA fantasy advice being misapplied to the larger genre. I felt it was appropriate in one genre, but not in all of them. And then there were voices online which were really interesting that said, look, the cartoons are coming out of publishers not wanting to pay for photo shoots, which are more expensive and production heavy. It's not a legitimate taste trend that's driving this. So we were talking about all of that. And then you have digital marketing as a factor. If you don't have an image that really pops as an ad by itself, that's going to repeat across a lot of forms, then it's not going to work. So there's a lot of considerations that go into a cover. But this idea of just linked man hands, as I called it, said to me everything that I wanted to say about the book. This is a gay romance. This is about two men. They're in love. At the skin tone on one of the hands changes in book 2, and we have Nasser Kazemi, who's the Persian American hero of that book, very clearly that he is a brown-skinned man. So it allows us to address that and include that. And you're right. I think there's always been a factor of the readership that doesn't even like an overly detailed description of a character, because they want to come up with their own vision of what the character looks like.
A theme in Sapphire Storm, as well as in the previous novel, Sapphire Spring, is the idea of redemption. Is it possible for someone to achieve redemption in real life, or is it only possible on the pages of a fictionalized novel?
It's absolutely possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. And I think what it comes down to, and this is very much the theme of Sapphire Spring, I mean, it's a bully romance, and the bully steps forward in adulthood to say, I was closeted and in love with you, and that's why I did it. And the bullied victim says, thank you for that disclosure, but that's not enough to make this go away. You were pretty horrible, and your friends were worse, and you did nothing to stop them. So he embarks on a journey of what is the actual legwork that I have to do to make up for this. And I think that's the difference. I think a lot of people, we live in an apology culture, right? I'm going to make a big public apology, and then I want you to shut up about it. And that's not what an amends really is. And Mason Werther in Sapphire Spring he enters recovery because he's dealing with substance abuse issues that are born out of his refusal to accept himself as a bisexual man for so long. And he is introduced to this concept of the ninth step in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is about making an amends. It's actually about what is the compensation? What are you going to put on the table to make this right? And the whole book is that story. How can he make that right? And I mean, part of it is he has really good sex with Nasser, so that helps. But that's not all of it. And he would like that to be all of it too, and it's not. So I think it is possible. I think in fiction, we sometimes accelerate the timelines for things. We have people say things we wish they would say more frequently and sooner, particularly in romance, which is a genre defined by optimism and believing what is the best of people. But I think the fundamentals are there and they're true.
I need to ask you about something that's come up with your podcast, The Dinner Party Show, which everyone can find at www.thedinnerpartyshow.com. There's been a focus on your podcast over the last few years in which you've had episodes focused on the murder of Billy Newton, a young man who was horrifically murdered in 1990.
Yes.
His murder was unsolved, but you brought his death back into focus via your podcast. Last month, February of 2023, the murder was solved. Where were you when you heard this news, and what were your thoughts stemming from that?
Eric Shaw Quinn, who is my co-host and producing partner for the Dinner Party Show, and I had one of the proudest moments of our talking about that case was when the LAPD detective in charge of it, who had inherited it after 30 years, called us about our work. And Detective Lamberti had been a frequent guest on the show. And he came on the show, I'm going to say in October or November of last year, to basically say he was at a dead end. And it was a sad moment for us of feeling like we had done as much as we could do. But there was no DNA, there was no compelling DNA evidence that was going to be useful. A tip about Jeffrey Dahmer was not panning out, all this sort of stuff. And then out of nowhere, and I believe it was January or February, the months run together, he started texting us and he said, something really big is about to break. And I want you guys to be on your toes. And we thought, okay, 30 years with no leads. Our agenda had been to get people as obsessed with this murder as we were, so that if we died and it still wasn't solved, there would be a new generation talking about it. When he texted, he said, I want to talk to you guys. I'm in Oklahoma. And we were like, Oklahoma? What? And he had just gotten a confession thanks to the unbelievable work done by an empty nester named Clark Williams, inspired in part by our podcast, who had basically traced the killer to death row in an Oklahoma prison where she, because the killer now identifies as female, is serving out a life sentence without parole for a very similar murder, which Clark Williams uncovered. I fell out of my chair. I burst into tears, first of all, and practically fell out of my chair. I just never expected in a million years, not only that it would be solved this quickly, but that it would be solved on the basis of a confession from someone who, where all the facts were in support of the confession, right? That it didn't seem like just a crackpot. It was unbelievable. And, the message that Eric and I took away from it is never count out your own platform. We just started talking about this case because we wanted people to know about it. We didn't have an agenda. We didn't expect to solve it. We didn't have a documentary crew following us around. We just wanted Billy Newton not to be forgotten. And, with the work of the LAPD and a documentarian named Rachel Mason, who was also involved, and Clark Williams, we got justice for Billy. And every time I say that, I have to pinch myself.
Yeah. I do ask everyone to check out those episodes found on thedinnerpartyshow.com. It's compelling. It brings you in, and happily ever after, so to speak, at the end, where the loved ones of Billy Newton at least get some type of closure, inevitably.
Yeah, absolutely.
Christopher, I do have to end off by asking you a question. What comes up next? What do we have to look forward from you?
Oh, I'll never stop. I'm relentless. I'm working on another Sapphire Cove book currently, so
Oh,
that's what's coming up next, and I'm working on a bunch of other things. We're planning a celebration of my life, a celebration of my mother's life,
I was
excuse
like, wait a minute, is this some taken news about the life of
I'm
Christopher
fine.
Rice?
I'm fine for now, knock on wood. I made it home from my trip to Europe. We're planning a celebration of life for my mother. We're going to announce a date soon. It's just there's a lot going on. I'm very blessed. I'm very excited. I will always be writing a new book until I'm not here anymore.
That's wonderful. Everyone, please check out the brand new book, Sapphire Storm by Christopher Rice, written underneath the pen name C. Travis Rice. Thank you for your works.
Thank
Density
you.
of Souls came out at a time in my life when I needed to have a queer character like that was.
Mm,
Of course, your books are not all focused on queer genre and all that, but definitely that moment of time, I needed that. So I'm very much appreciative of the written works
thank
that
you.
you've done.
Thank you.
Everyone, you can find out more information on Christopher's website, ChristopherRiceBooks.com. I'll mention again, thedinnerpartyshow.com. And this is part of the Sapphire Cove series, which I'm happy is going to have another book. I thought it
Yes.
was 3 and done. And I
Mm-mm.
should also make mention that even though there's been 3 books written so far, this book can be read as a standalone book as well.
It can.
Even though Christopher and I are people that once you hear it's a trilogy, you have to read it from the start,
Yeah,
you can do a standalone if you only have a short period of time.
absolutely.
Christopher, thank you for this. Much
Thanks for having me.
appreciated. On behalf of Christopher Rice, my name is Douglas Parsons, reminding you to be good and always text when you get home. Until next time, everybody. Excellent.
Thank you. This was
Thank you.
great.